Hello everyone, I'm Greg Weaver. Welcome to The Audio Analyst. The stage name Pink Floyd was fashioned by combining the first names of two Carolina bluesmen, Pink Anderson and Floyd Dipperboy Council, whose records had had an enormous influence on the band's founders. The band, originally known as the Pink Floyd Sound, or alternately the Pink Floyd Blues Band, was co-founded in 1964 by Roger Keith Sid Barrett and George Roger Waters, who are reputed to have first met at a Saturday art class they both attended during their school years as childhood friends. And after Waters enrolled to study architecture at the Regent Street Polytech, now the University of Westminster in London, they added Nick Mason, a drummer, Rick Wright, a keyboard player, and Bob Close, the original lead guitarist. Now, Bob was more focused on his studies than music, and his interests were in jazz and blues rather than the pop and psychedelia that interested Sid. So Bob left the group around July of 1965. This motivated Sid to become the lead guitarist and vocalist and assume the bulk of the songwriting, while Bob went on to become a photographer and printmaker. Now, by the time they had released their first record, 1967's The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Sid's dependability, mental condition, and drug use were becoming increasingly problematic. With both his diminished capacity and creative contributions, Roger Waters somewhat reluctantly stepped up, guiding the group's work moving forward. It was during this period that guitarist David Gilmour was enlisted to cover for the increasingly unstable frontman. But by April of 1968, citing the ongoing concerns with both his apparent mental illness and his excessive use of psychedelic drugs, Sid was ousted from the band. Prior to Darkside and post The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which had been written almost exclusively by Sid, all the other bandmates had freely contributed to each of the previous four collective records: 1968's A Saucer Full of Secrets, 1969's Amagama, 1970's Atom Heart Mother, and 1971's Metal, as well as to their two original soundtracks, 1968's More and 1972's Obscured by Clouds. And while the musical ideas for Darkside were said to have arisen from their continual jamming and playing together, here, for the first time, Roger had written all the lyrics. Much of this material would be based on his inevitable, if tardy, rejection of his mother's lifelong teachings that his schooling and education all throughout his childhood and adolescence were all prerequisite preparation for a life that was going to start later, at some point in the future, a theme that he would revisit with more specificity with 1979's The Wall. But by 1972, approaching age 30, he had come to the abrupt realization that living wasn't something to prepare for, something that was going to start at some unspecified future point in time. It was happening right now and had been all along. He has said that this newfound awareness had come as quite a revelation, a shock actually, and it was his recently discovered mindfulness that he chose to explore with this album's lyrics. There can be little debate that it was 1973's groundbreaking The Dark Side of the Moon that catapulted Pink Floyd to the forefront of the progressive rock pantheon, and for some extremely good reasons. It was coincident with both the success of Metal, which had found Roger finally beginning to write more relatable song lyrics, and the band feeling the burden of their heavy touring schedule. And it was also about this time that David had started to fall out of love with some of that psychedelic noodling stuff, as he said it. While it was apparent to all that they had developed an extremely accomplished and tight live sound, he felt that for them to move forward with their collective goal, that of becoming rich and famous rock stars, they would have to step up their game. And finally, one cannot dismiss the inestimable contributions of one of the most successful producers and engineers of his generation, Alan Parsons. At age 16, when he learned that EMI was hiring at the Hayes facility in the London borough of Hillingdon, he left public school to pursue an apprenticeship there. Though he got his start in the research building, his interests were soon dominated by the tape duplication department, where he allegedly got to hear the masters for the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This new fascination drove him to inquire about maybe moving to a position at EMI's Abbey Road studios. Though he met with initial resistance to the idea, after petitioning his supervisor, at just 18 years old, he was granted an interview and, surprisingly, just a few days later, was allowed to transfer to Abbey Road as an assistant engineer. Starting as a tape operator and working on the Beatles' Get Back sessions, he eventually earned his first credit for his efforts on the Beatles' Abbey Road album. He soon found himself working on more and more prominent projects by bands like the Hollies and Wings, and striking gold with Al Stewart's Year of the Cat. He has always considered himself to be a recording director, equating his efforts in making records to those of Stanley Kubrick's work in film. His remarkable efforts on Dark Side garnered his first Grammy nomination, and he went on to earn a total of 13 nominations with one win. Now, David has said that the musical ideas that would become Dark Side started during jamming and writing sessions they held in a rehearsal room that belonged to the Rolling Stones in the Bermondsey district of southeast London. The Dark Side studio sessions began on the last day of May 1972 at EMI's Abbey Road Studio 2, which had the distinction of using a new 8-track solid-state EMI TG-12345 Mark IV console. It was EMI's first solid-state mixing console and was said to have a much smoother, brighter sound than the older 4-track Red 51 console that it replaced in November of 1968. Over the next 7 months, disrupted by many other ventures, the band would spend a total of nearly 40 days in Studios 2 and 3, working with Alan Parsons and Peter James to realize this monumental, unbelievably well-constructed, multi-layered, and groundbreaking album. Originally expected to be released by August of 1972, given the conflicts presented by their other projects, the release of the Obscured by Clouds soundtrack on June 2nd, shooting Adrian Maben's amazing concert experience film, Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii, and their involvement with French choreographer Roland Petit and his mixture of avant-garde experimentation with classical choreography, his Ballet de Marseille, EMI pushed the planned release, affording them more time to fashion the record as they had envisioned. The LP dropped on March 1st, 1973. I was 17, and it was just 79 days before I would graduate high school. But its impact has set records that still stand. Dark Side holds the record for continuous weeks remaining on the Billboard Top 200 chart, and by a monstrous margin. No matter whose count you look at, Billboard says it was 917 weeks, Wikipedia says it was 971 weeks, the Wall Street Journal says it was 1,100 weeks, but the achievement is unassailable. And with certified sales of over 24.8 million copies worldwide, and an unverified claim of nearly 50 million copies sold, it remains the fourth best-selling release in the history of recorded music. Whether you describe it as pop, avant-garde, or progressive rock, this complexly layered, superbly crafted, many-faceted, nearly impossible to define record quickly found acceptance and a nearly unmatched level of personal connection with listeners around the world. Its ability to touch so many listeners at such a personal level endures to this day, regardless of how you choose to label it. What Roger was claiming to question as an individual then mirrored to a great extent what many of us were questioning in our own lives at that time. Remember that we were in the throes of the Vietnam and Arab-Israeli wars and the terrorist attack that had claimed the lives of 11 athletes during the Munich Olympic Games, as well as the Watergate scandal and the OPEC oil embargo. Roger has said that the dark side of the moon was an expression of political, philosophical, humanitarian empathy that was desperate to get out, in which he was questioning what he saw as the fundamental question facing us all. Was the human race capable of being humane? Much of this album's power and influence stems from its deft integration of accomplished, somewhat underground progressive rock with more traditional pop musical sensibilities. This was music that you could sing along with, and yet you could just as easily allow your mind to soar into the unknown when listening in a darkened room. Its lasting appeal comes from the pioneering fusion of the power of its progressive and distinctive musical forms, its innovative and exceptionally refined production values, and the universality of the concepts that Roger was presenting. The themes he visits here may be seen to apply equally to every new generation, assuring that the underlying messages continue to be relevant to this day. Whatever the reasons, the result is undeniable. Let's take a look, track by track, into Dark Side of the Moon. Side 1, Track 1, Speak to Me. Barely over a minute long, it takes its title from a request that Alan Parsons would repeatedly make to the band from the control room. It opens with that now iconic heartbeat, which was subject to a lot of speculation when first released, but was fashioned from Nick's bass drum using a Kepx noise gate. But its remarkable bass extension, its distinctly layered presentation of a wide range of interspersed sounds, some voices from Us and Them, a scream from The Great Gig in the Sky, a clock from Time, and many more, serve to inform you right out of the gate what an exceptionally well-crafted production this is, and what an amazing journey you are about to embark upon. Then, that famous crescendo leads into Side 1, Track 2, Breathe in the Air. What we hear is the final realization of a piece they had been working on since those early sessions at the Rolling Stones warehouse rehearsal space. Again, we find Parsons' signature in the immersive sound space of this track. Overall tonality here is so silky smooth and balanced, with deep, articulate low frequencies, richly textured mid-range, and a shimmering, airy sense of high-frequency energy, presenting a dense and vibrant musical tapestry. This is our first taste of the brilliance of Rick's keyboard work, including his languid chord progression. He openly admits to having first heard on the Kind of Blue Miles Davis album. David's rhythm guitar is so powerful here, looped through a Leslie rotating speaker, lobbing its sound around the room in different directions, giving it that modulated tremolo effect, vibrato Doppler effect, and some interesting phasing. And don't overlook the power and beauty of David's manually double-track vocals here, complemented by the lush, rich backing vocals from Doris Troy, Leslie Duncan, Lisa Strike, and Barry St. John, who contribute to virtually every other track throughout the rest of the album. Side 1, Track 3, On the Run. We emerge yet again out of the crossfade from the previous song, which, save for the hard break between sides 1 and 2, is true for every song transition. This track features a myriad of effects, mostly created with the use of the Electronic Music Studio's VCS3 analog synthesizer. Some of the effects were created by playing a guitar with a mic stand, played backward. The Doppler effect you hear was accomplished by panning between channels and adding a downward pitch shift. And someone is running and panting back and forth left to right. Keep in mind, all of these effects are accomplished manually, with virtually everyone in the studio manning dials and pot slider controls to help realize this amazing sonic panorama. What may come off as just some very complex studio exercises with lesser systems will reveal itself to be a seductive and enchanting soundscape on a good one. Side 1, Track 4, Time. The track's opening iconic alarm clock sequence was created from a sequence of recordings that Parsons had been commissioned to create for a sound effects record early in the days of quadraphonic. Each different clock recording was spooled separately on an individual tape machine, back-timed for the crescendo, and started manually. The result will test your system's transient capabilities and reveal its ability to render the layering of its staging and imaging cues, as it is huge, both in scope and scale, with each clock revealing its size and occupying its own specific position in space. I'm especially fond of the decidedly bronzy flavor portrayed by the large chime to the far left of the stage. Playing a Farfisa organ and Wurlitzer electric piano, Rick atypically shares lead vocals on this track with David, to splendid effect. And David's solo is epic, rivaling his celebrated solos from Comfortably Numb on the Wall. Now, lyrically, the description of the passage of time here makes direct reference to the realization Roger was no longer preparing to live his life, but was right in the middle of doing so. There is one particular line that stands out to me here. Hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. Which to me sounds like a phrase you'd be more likely to come across in a W. Somerset Maugham book than encounter in a progressive rock song. Side 1, track 5, The Great Gig in the Sky. This remarkable chord progression had begun as a piece originally titled The Morality Sequence, or The Religion Song, one that had previously been performed live as a simple organ instrumental with spoken word accompaniment. As they were closing in on finishing the record, and they were trying many different approaches, including the overlaying of recordings of NASA astronauts, they wondered what it might be like if someone would just wailed or scatted over it. This is when Claire Torrey entered the picture. Alan was familiar with her work and reached out to her. Though initially unavailable, she made time on a Sunday evening later in the recording sessions. Now, by all accountings, what we hear on this release was her first take, as she reveals her amazing range, scatting from nuanced growls to soaring textured vibrato. Her contributions, accompanying Rick's sensitive and nuanced keyboard work, elevate this track into an atmospheric, trance-like, remarkably expressive performance, resulting in a most powerful conclusion to Side 1. Side 2, Track 1, Money. Originally written and demoed as a very bluesy kind of take, Roger said he developed its very unusual, irregular 7/4 time signature during those Bermondsey rehearsal sessions. And his bass line here is both driving and unforgettable. Once they decided to add a saxophone, David suggested Dick Parry, who he had played with in a band back when they both were teenagers in Cambridge. The story goes that Dick was offered the gig because they just didn't know any other sax players. They augmented the track with the sounds of a cash register and jingling coins, using a manual tape loop said to be some 20 feet long that had to be spooled using a mic stand off to the side of the recorder. Regardless of how they pulled it off, it is captivating. And when the time change shifts back to a simple 4/4 at about 3:05, bang. Propelled by Nick's drumming, it's rock city. And released as a single, it became their first hit in the United States. And while he can't recall why it seemed so important at the time, Roger wanted to have spoken word voiceovers on many of the LP's tracks. They recorded members of their crew, including Roger the Hat Manifold, as well as the studio's Irish doorman. Coincidentally, Wings was recording in another studio, and they had captured guitarist Henry McCullough delivering his iconic line, "I don't know, I was really drunk at the time," as the track closes. Side 2, Track 2, Us and Them. This track was resurrected from music that had been set aside for years, and originally created for a sequence in director Michelangelo Antonioni's 1969 film, Zabriskie Point, that he had chosen not to use. But here, with Nick's tempered, slow play, with Rick's finesse and touch on the keys, you get the impression that it is all about the space, not just the notes. This cut, along with The Great Gig in the Sky, may represent Rick's finest composition and playing across the entire Floyd catalog. And Dick Perry's rich, densely textured, palpable sax tonality is the star here, as he gives us a lesson in melodic flow. Its lyrics are direct and linear, sung by David, backed by the girls and Rick again, clearly expressing the heart of Waters' theme. And the composition is perfectly timed to allow gaps for the repeated echo on David's vocals, an amazing instance of employing space to intensify the musical drama. Side 2, track 3, Any Color You Like. While lyricless, we are again taken on another VCS-3 synthesized trip, using tape loops to help fashion the rising and falling keyboard solo. This piece soon segues into David's use of two guitars, where he constructs a powerful and soaring harmonizing effect with a Univibe guitar pedal. It may be overlooked today, but these were both rather elaborate effects for their time. And listen closely here, and you'll pick up on a slightly brisker presentation of the same chord pattern found in Breathe in the Air and its reprise as time closes. Side 2, track 4, Brain Damage. This track references Sid and, in some manner, defends the notion of being different. Roger had written an earlier version referred to as the Lunatic Song about Sid and their time in Cambridge. But I think it a somewhat obvious conclusion here, and one that foreshadows the thematic material that would fill out their next album, Wish You Were Here, a work that would include musings on alienation and the cynicism and contempt Waters had developed for the business of making records, with its 9-part suite considering the missing of founding member Syd Barrett. Musically, once again, we are treated to David's guitar being played through a Leslie over a sonic bed constructed again by the VCS-3, with the recurring heartbeat and the contribution of the entire band, haughty laughter, and of course, the recurring voiceovers. Side 2, track 5, Eclipse. David and Roger harmonize here, closing out this remarkable creation. The final lyric here says, "But the sun is eclipsed by the moon." Now, a common interpretation of its meaning is that in Roger's mind, Sid was the sun, and Roger, as the moon, was originally in his shadow. Now, the pupil had surpassed the teacher. And employing a bookend technique found frequently throughout Roger's work, the album fades to a close with the same heartbeat that opens the journey. In celebration of this past week's golden anniversary of its monumental release, I wanted to share this remarkable experience with you. As of this recording, Discogs shows just shy of 1,200 versions available. Very confusing, to say the least. Now, I whittled my collection down to 10 copies if you count my 3 digital versions. I still have an original 1973 UK Harvest release, an early 1973 US Harvest release, the 1978 Japanese Pro-Use release, the 1979 US Mobile Fidelity MFSL release, the European 2000 Harvest 180-gram 30th Anniversary Edition release, and I've ordered the 50th Anniversary Box Set Edition, due to ship March 24th. Though I don't really expect it to be significantly different from the somewhat darker, less detailed 30th Anniversary Edition. They've given no provenance on the source tapes that they're using, so who knows. But guys, without question, in terms of the richest, most vibrant tonality, the widest range of frequency extension and dynamic scaling, smoothest overall balance, and the most open and unrestricted sense of space, the finest sounding version I've yet heard is my 1981 Mobile Fidelity UHQR release, pressed on the original JVC Super Vinyl formula. Now look, I know this is a pricey release, but if you have it, or if you get a chance to hear it on a great system, I'm sure you'll understand. And for those of you interested, I've shared a host of links to provide deeper dives into this landmark recording in today's description section, so be sure to check them out. As always, thanks for taking the time to drop by. Further information on supporting the channel may be found in today's description section or at my website, theaudioanalyst.com. Please stay safe and keep the music playing. Till next time, cheers.